What I'm finding in the Nixon-Kissinger relationship is most analysts have looked at it in terms of course, its impact on foreign policy and ideas about foreign policy. What I also recognize in it is it had a very distinctly domestic political component. Richard Nixon sought to use the talents of Henry Kissinger to centralize foreign policy decision-making in the White House to ensure that credit for foreign policy decisions of the sort that he wanted to make, the opening to China, negotiations with the Soviet Union, went to the president and was an important part of his image as a peace candidate in 1972. In that sense, using Henry Kissinger to cut out the State Department, to cut out other parts of the American government, and to make sure the credit flowed to the president was a distinctly political decision. And it had to do with Nixon's belief that he could be reelected and gain a landslide in part by foreign policy success, and that success would be credited to him through using Henry Kissinger. You know, a fascinating man in many respects. A lot of people find this comparison a little unusual, but I see in him and some of the way in which he affected American media of the time something similar with President Barack Obama, in that Kissinger was also one of these great stories. Here was an immigrant refugee, a Jew from Germany of the 1930s, comes to the United States, achieves this extraordinary success, and is in effect one of the most powerful people in the country, and comes to be appointed Secretary of State. In fact, in the 1970s, at the height of Kissinger's popularity, there were all these attempts to amend the Constitution to allow foreign-born citizens to run for president, which is a sign of how much his story and his popularity was at the time. If you had asked me that 5 or 6 years ago, I would have said yes. We'd moved back to a type of crusading diplomacy characterized by, in the sort of second inaugural address of President Bush, who said that we should make freedom our goal in the 21st century, and that this should be the central aim of American foreign policy, should be the promotion of freedom around the world. Well, that type of crusading diplomacy was exactly the sort of thing Kissinger felt had got us into Vietnam. And Kissinger believed very much in a diplomacy of limits. It sometimes was characterized by the German word realpolitik, or realism. And in many respects, you could make the case that President Obama, who has identified with a sort of more limited foreign policy, or a foreign policy that recognizes the constraints on the United States, actually has behaved more like a Henry Kissinger in power than his predecessor. I don't think Governor Romney will present an alternative to the Obama foreign policy that is that stark. Now, he has made criticisms on the Middle East, on a couple of other issues, on China, in terms of the economic questions, but he hasn't articulated a vision that is distinct from Obama. And because the election looks like it's going to be fought out largely on questions of the economy and this idea of what role government should play in the economy and regulations and this, I don't think the American people will really get a choice on foreign policy at all. And in fact, in that sense, I think you're likely to see probably greater continuity in foreign policy over the next administration, even if Obama is defeated.